Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we talk about firefighters and paramedic line of duty deaths to learn from these tragic events and potentially prevent them from happening in the future. I am Paul, and as usual, my co-hosts Doug and Dirk are with us today. I want to give a little shout out to Beyond the Breakers podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. They've been helping us get the word out on our podcast about line of duty deaths, so thanks a lot to the Beyond the Breakers guys. So what's new? You guys, what have you been doing? Watching, reading, playing? Doug?
Well, I've been watching the Oilers. Dirk doesn't want to talk about that, but they had a good season, good playoff run, kicked Calgary's ass, did better than Toronto, so that's good. But unfortunately, we ran into a better team and got knocked out of the playoffs last night. It happens. Good series, though, good season, so I'm not too disappointed. But that's been my life lately, and that's about it.
And weren't they doing poorly like for a good part of the season?
Well,
and they kind of turned it around.
They had a really good start to the season, and then they went into the toilet, and then they fired their coach and brought up another coach, and then turned it around. And since in February they were out of the playoffs, and from February till end of March, beginning of April, they worked their way back into the playoffs, won 2 rounds, and then lost. So
that's after I went to that game, and I was good luck and turned them around, right?
Turn around, I guess. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Dirk, what's new with you?
Yeah, so I follow hockey as well, but Doug already said everything that is to say. It was good run, at least we don't have to say maybe next time or more like next year. Other than that, I finally got hit by COVID, so survived. I'm a COVID survivor. I'm a superhero. Other than that, no, everybody's is okay. It was just like a nasty sinus infection, so kind of got over it. Back to work. We moved stations. Our technical rescue team moved stations, so we went from a fairly slow station to one of the busiest stations in town. So we'll see how that's gonna pan out.
Perfect.
But we do have two pumper trucks now instead of engines, instead of just one. So that helps too with the response times and with responses anyways. So just.
And when we publish this episode, which will probably be mid-June, you're going to be across the pond in the homeland, right?
Yeah. Going on a trip tomorrow, family visiting, and then I'm going to go to Hanover, city of Hanover, where the Interschutz exhibition is going to happen. It's just the biggest trade show in the fire service that nobody ever heard of in North America. I think there's an Interschutz North America now. They've been doing this, I think, FDIC, and they are working together. So gonna go there. I'm not sure. That's my 3rd time I'm going, so we'll see what's happening. Because of COVID, everything got kind of delayed. Most major truck manufacturers not gonna showcase their trucks. I think it's still gonna be pretty big, but I got 3 days there, so it will be fun. I'm gonna meet up with lots of people. Maybe I can throw in a little interview podcast kind of. See if I get time between
that'd be
looking
great.
at fire trucks and drinking beer.
Yeah, drinking beer and fire trucks. I went in 2000. You and I were both there, but we didn't
we were
know
both
each
there
other.
at the same time.
Yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed it. It was super hot when we were in
Augsburg,
right?
That was awesome city too. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, that was really, really cool. And when I booked my flight over there, I forgot about the date change. I booked the 6 o'clock flight, and I arrived a day late. But everybody says, "Where were you?" I says, "What do you mean?" Like, oh, yeah, awesome.
You're traveling ahead of time. You're traveling into the future.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I've been busy. I did a recording with the Beyond the Breakers guys a couple days ago, which was fun. I worked on a script for that and stuff last week as well. I was on a motorcycle trip a week ago in the Rockies with my son and a bunch of friends, and did mainly road riding in the Nelson area. Beautiful roads, nice and curvy, beautiful scenery. The weather was okay. It wasn't too warm, but that was fun. And so looking forward to recording another episode here on our podcast. Okay. Well, continuing the theme for June, which is commercial building fires, this week's episode is about the June 17th, 2001 fire in the borough of Queens in New York City, where 3 FDNY firefighters and about died and a dozen career-ending injuries occurred while performing interior suppression and exterior ventilation, and an explosion occurred in the cellar of a hardware store, causing a structural collapse. The fire, which occurred just a few months before 9/11, has almost been forgotten and overshadowed by the tragic World Trade Center events that occurred in September. At the time, the FDNY was the biggest fire department in the United States, and I believe they still are. Consists of over 11,000 uniformed firefighters serving a population of 8 million people in about 320 square miles. The building that's involved in this incident was a hardware store. 80 years, the Long Island General Supply Store has been a fixture on Long Island City section of Queens, serving local contractors and residents with all their hardware needs. Unfortunately, this also included propane tanks and numerous other flammable liquids in the store. 2 structures were involved in the incident. Both buildings were interconnected on the floors as well as in the cellars. They were both built prior to 1930 of ordinary construction, and they were 2 stories in height, in addition to the full cellar. Building number 1 measured about 2,000 square feet and was triangular in shape. Building number 2 was about 1,000 square feet and was rectangular in shape on the one side. Building 1 and 2 shared a common party wall and were interconnected on the first floor and in the cellar. Building to building access in the cellar was through a fire door. Of course, as usual, the fire door was blocked open to allow free movement between the cellars, which were used for storage. As a fire inspector throughout my career, definitely was always a problem was blocked fire doors. I still go around in hotels and take the wedges away when I find blocked doors with wood wedges and throw them in the garbage cans and stuff. I did that in a school once when we were doing an inspection, and they bought specific metal wedges for their doors. And the principal phoned to complain to my chief, saying, "Hey, your fire inspector stole our wedges. We paid for those." And the chief, of course, told them what they could do with their wedges. But anyway, the hardware store occupied the first floor cellars of both buildings. Building 1 had 2 apartments also on the second floor, and Building 2 had an office and storage space on the second floor. There was a third uninvolved building that was attached to the west side of Building 3. So there were 2, so they're all kind of in a row, 1, 2, and then Building 3. It had a flat roof system, which was sheathed with 5/8 plywood covered by felt paper and a rubber roof membrane. The foundation was stone and mortar, of course, from the 30s. The support system was steel masonry posts with columns and wooden support beams. Lolly columns, which I don't know what lolly columns are. You guys? No?
Yeah, I have no idea what a lolly column is. No.
I should have looked that up before.
Never even heard that
Okay.
name before.
All right, that's a new one for us. Something to learn. There were considerable amounts of accelerants and hazardous materials in the cellars of the hardware store. There was almost 200 Class II compressed combustible and oxidizer gases in cylinders, and about 170 gallons of highly flammable liquids in gallon cans like acetone and toluene and all kinds of lots of thinner, paint thinner, stuff like that in the basement. All 3 of the line of duty deaths victims of this incident were very experienced firefighters, ranging with 11 to 27 years on the job. All victims had full department issued PPE on, including Nomex hoods and SCBAs with integrated pass alarms. The weather at the time was 69 degrees with a wind of 13 miles per hour, so none of these were significant factors in the event. The incident itself, the initial and subsequent immediate apparatus dispatched to the incident were 4 engines consisting of 4 firefighters, a lieutenant, and a chauffeur. So they had 6 guys on the engines, it sounded like. Is that typical FDNY, Doug?
Yeah, I think at the time it was. I think nowadays there's some engines have 6 and some have 5. There's a whole thing with the union in the city where they argue about it, but some have 5 now, but I think back then they all had 6.
For our listeners that don't know it, even though I spout off about selling fire trucks for 25 years, Doug is our resident FDNY expert. And
Well, I'm not an expert.
he has a lot of knowledge. He's
I'm a big
followed
fan of
FDNY.
the FDNY. I'm a
Yep.
long distance buff of the FDNY, you could say, but I'm
And
far from an expert of the FDNY.
don't you have like a Sim City or something made of FDNY and all their?
Game I
Hey,
play a little bit.
it's a
Yeah,
game. What's that game called?
Mission Chief, it's called.
Mission Chief. They give him a plug. I was super excited when I did that Beyond the Breakers podcast this weekend because it involved the fire in New York City, and we got to talk about the New York fireboats, the
Yeah.
firefighter and stuff like that. And I have a model of firefighter, and it actually firefighter appeared in Boston this week, restored for the NFPA convention. Yeah, and the big problem for the Normandy fire was the hose couplings. The New York fire couldn't connect to the standpipes for the ship to supply water because they had different threads, which of course in Canada we still have different threads, but in the States, national hose is pretty well standard. But anyway, a little bit distracted there. Squirrel. 2 squads were sent. And a squad in New York, what is that? The difference between a squad and an engine in New York in FDNY?
I mean, historically, squads have been a few different things over the years in New York. Back in the war years, they were bread trucks just for extra manpower, kind of really, not really fire apparatus. And then they all kind of went away. But in the late 90s, they brought the squads back mainly as a way to augment the hazmat company because there's only one hazmat company in New York. So the rig is a rescue pumper with always has 6 guys. It's first, second, and third due areas. It operates as an engine, and then beyond that, they operate in the borough or in the citywide as a special unit going to working fires and technical rescue and hazmat calls. They're part of the Special Operations Command with the 5 rescue companies and hazmat and all that. So it's a glorified engine, I guess you could say. It's an engine in its first, second, third due, a special unit beyond that, and typically at a fire when it comes in on what New York would call 1075, 1076, 1077. The chief would determine if it's going to operate as a engine or as a truck, and I would say most of the time it operates as a truck. Even on their riding list, they have the list is like, if we're an engine, this is your jobs. If you're a truck, this is your jobs, based on what they do. So that's what a squad is in New York, which I always kind of laugh at the word squad, and I think of New York and Chicago and Toronto, where in New York a squad is one thing, but in Toronto that same thing's called a rescue. But a squad in Toronto and Chicago is called a rescue in New York, and it's just the joys of the fire service can't figure it. No one wants to just be the same. Everyone has to put their own spin on everything.
That'd be a good tailboard talk one day. Is how the differences around North America. The other thing, so Special Operations Command, so that's citywide, and they can pull resources from wherever for special events.
They instead of a while ago, the rescue companies were just in a battalion, whatever battalion they were geographically in. That was their administrative battalion, but they have a rescue battalion now who reports in the Special Operations Command, and I think administratively the rescues, the squads, the hazmat engines, the hazmat company are all through the rescue battalion or hazmat battalion, and which then report to the chief of SOC instead of a division chief. And yeah, basically they're all elite specialized companies where like you come out of Proby school, you go to an engine or a truck, and then eventually, if you want, you can work your way into the special operations, and you're kind of the
like a higher level of training and expertise is basically what you're
way
saying.
More training. Like it's
yeah,
ridiculous the training they get.
Right.
And then obviously, like in New York, when you're detailed, you get detailed in your battalion. So special operations gets detailed to other special operations units. And like it's not just where anybody can work on a special operations company. You have to be a special operations person to work on a special operations company. So they're kind of their own little world within the FDNY umbrella.
Right. I was kind of trying to do that with Clearwater with wildfire. A lot of
Yeah.
places in Western North America are doing like a wildland division within the department, and they'll have the wildland apparatus. But certain people are trained to go. They have their 1051 or whatever training and stuff. And I thought that was a good idea to give them an identity and a reason for specialization, and then define the training and stuff. So I really like that concept. That's cool. So they had 4 engines, 2 squads. Thanks for the definition on squad. They had 4 truck companies, also staffed with 6, 3 chief officers with aides, which was a battalion chief, a division chief, two battalion chiefs, a division chief, and the special operations command that you talked about, and 1 rescue 4 with 4 firefighters, captain, and a chauffeur. I love that chauffeur thing. That's awesome. I need to be that here in Lacombe. That would have been cool. These apparatus were directly involved in the initial stages of the incident. Many more also responded as the call unfolded. In fact, this was one of the most responded to calls in FDNY history until the World Trade Center, just a few months later. There was 144 pieces of apparatus that came to the scene, 46 engines, 33 ladders, 16 battalion chiefs, 2 deputy chiefs, all 5 rescues, 7 squads, and many more. In fact, with the exception of the fireboats, the JFK hose wagon, which I'm not sure what that is.
It's just a truck
tender,
with LDH hose on it for the JFK airport.
Right, and the decon unit and the thawing units. Every type of special unit came to the scene of this event. From even Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, I can't really conceive of 46 engines and 33 ladders in my head. But anyway,
I always joke when New York has these big calls that go to a 5th alarm or whatever, and there's 33 ladders on scene. I think of where we live, and I go, well, where would the 33rd ladder come from to a fire here? And it would be driving for a long time.
I've done the math a couple times actually in my role in Fort Saskatchewan and just for fun in Edmonton and Calgary, counting all the aerials within 50 miles or 100 miles and where they would come from and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but yeah, you'd be pressed to pick over 20 and get them all together to the same call.
Yep.
On June 17th, 2001, at about just after 2 in the afternoon, 2:20, dispatch received a call from a resident of a reported fire at the hardware store. A minute later, dispatch assigned the first alarm companies, and approximately the same time, crews cleared the scene of a previous call about 7 blocks away and were added to the alarm. Battalion 49 cleared along with Squad 288 from the previous call and notified dispatch that they're adding them units to the structure fire call. Battalion 45 was assigned as first due chief, and engine 260 and ladder 163 were assigned as the first due companies. However, due to the proximity of the previous call, 288 was stopped by a civilian in the street for a verbal alarm, and they were the first to arrive at the scene 2 minutes after the call. The civilian led the captain from 288 through to a downstairs apartment in building 3. That's the one adjacent that wasn't directly involved in the fire. To a cellar door on the exposure 3 side of building 2, so the west side. The captain heard fire crackling behind the cellar door and transmitted to central dispatch that they had a working structure fire. The fire origin actually was found out later, discovered to be flammable liquid that was gasoline that was accidentally spilled outside the rear security door of the cellar on exposure number 3, the building that was to the west. I suppose we would call 3 the Bravo exposure, maybe. Should be the Charlie.
It's Charlie, yeah.
Yeah, Charlie exposure.
Yeah, they go 1, 2, 3, 4
right.
For Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Yeah.
So some youths were playing in the yard, knocked over a gasoline can inadvertently. The gasoline traveled under the door, and the vapors were believed to be ignited by a pilot light of a hot water heater located inside the cellar of building 2. When the captain returned to the exposure 1, the Alpha side, members of Squad 288 were pulling a 1 3/4 hand line off their rig. How often do we do that mistake? We got a commercial building fire and we're pulling off a hand line, but the captain, good training here, informed them that the fire's in the hardware store, pull a 2.5 or a 65 off the truck. The roofman from Squad 88 took a saw and performed forcible entry on the security gates that protected the 2 front entrance doors of the building. In the next 5 minutes, the rest of that first alarm assignment all showed up and arrived at the scene. Battalion 49 assumed command, began his walk around to check for conditions and fire extension throughout the structure. So another checkbox, if you will, the old 360 that is often forgotten. They got that. They got the right size line and they did their 360. Good for them. As the IC was walking down the exposure 2 side, the Bravo, a civilian informed the IC that firefighters would probably have better access to the fire through the rear of the structure on the Charlie side. I don't know why they say rear of the structure, but on Charlie side, but maybe near the Charlie side. IC instructed the engine to stretch a hand line to the rear of the structure for possible entry into the cellar through that door that the civilian had told them about. The cellar door was accessed through a security gate between exposure 2 and 3, right in the corner. The IC assigned Battalion 45, the all-hands chief, as rear sector command over the forceful entry on the exposure 3 side. I got to say again, so they're dividing up their call by areas. They're assigning officers to make sure it's safe. This is classic. You know what? You guys can all guess what I'm going to say next, but very good sectoring off of their people so that if something happens, they can handle it, right? Which is good. I didn't say it. The lieutenant from 163 ladder, irons, the whole guys, along with a member from Rescue 4 and ladder 117, began forcing the steel security doors at the back of the structure. Battalion 45 ordered engine 262 to stretch a 65 or a 2.5-inch line to the back door. While waiting for the door to be forced, the officer from engine 260 ordered his crew to stretch and another 2.5-inch or 65 mil line. So they're getting ready to go to battle here. They're getting their ducks in a row. They got a rocking fire that they can't get at. They're going to be ready to hit it when they can, which is awesome. Ladder 116 with the saw and the vent man raised a portable ladder to the roof of exposure 1 side, the front. Ladder 116 can and members from ladder 117 raised another extension ladder to a window and conducted a quick search of the 2nd floor. The vent man and roof man, ladder 163, went to the roof in their bucket, so they had a platform of some sort to perform vertical ventilation. 163 roof exited the bucket, met up with ladder 117 roof, rescue 4 roof, and so all the different guys assigned by role, vent, roof, can, officer, are meeting up with each other when they go to their areas from the different units, which is kind of unique to the Western guy like me, who are used to saying the whole 4 guys go to one place.
Yeah, I mean, New York is, and I'm sure the rest of, not the rest of, but very common in the East Coast, I think, that in New York for sure, based on where you ride on the truck, you have a predetermined job, and more so based on if you're first due, second due, it's already, you show up knowing what you're going to do. So like if you're the roof guy, you're going to the roof every time. You're not waiting to be told by command or your company officer. You know, if you're the first due ladder and you're the can or whatever, you know exactly what you're doing. So instead of sending the whole crew to the roof, I guess all the trucks and the rescue and the squad have a roof guy. They all go to the roof, and then they work together and do what the roof people do.
So that's common in New York, that they split crews from different rigs, right? Which makes it kind of complicated to follow who's where and what. But it's basically you got the roof sector, so the roof guys go to the roof. But Doug, is there ever an officer on the roof then assigned to that, or is that a battalion chief that takes the roof sector?
I know for sure the company officer typically would not go to the roof because on a ladder truck in New York, the officer, the can man, and the irons man are what they call the inside team. So they're going in, and then the other guys in the truck are the chauffeur, the roof guy, and the OV, which is outside vent. So they're typically doing going in a window or venting from a window or a fire escape or something like that for the OV, the chauffeur be putting the ladder to the roof, and then the roof man could get up there with his saw. And I think the chauffeur, once that kind of stuff is done, or the squad chauffeur, if you're not like the engine chauffeur that's pumping on your truck, you kind of just read the play and go fill in where you think you're needed. Typically, I think they go help the roof or they go help the line, but it's very individual work in a truck company as opposed to an engine where you're more all together as a crew going in, fighting a fire, stretching a line. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah,
Cool.
great. Good description there, and hopefully the listeners enjoy that part. While they were on the roof guys, they noted that they had heavy white smoke pushing from the chimney of the hardware store, one of the two chimneys, I guess. Ventilation crews removed panes of glass from the skylights at approximately the same time. 288 squad had completed the forceful entry on the front doors of the Alpha or Exposure 1 side of the hardware store. They encountered medium smoke condition, no heat inside the first floor. Squad 288, as they went in the first floor, they located an interior door that opened into a 6-foot-long landing, which led to a set of stairs going down to the cellar. The captain from ladder 116 and the officer and a firefighter with a thermal imaging camera. Hey, they didn't leave it outside, which is another one in our too many of these line of duty death reports is they don't use it. These guys had it. They used it with them, so this is pro. They entered the landing to assess conditions. They encountered heavy black smoke, but no flames. The tick revealed heat in the walls around the stair enclosure and sections of the floor. The stairs had a plywood slide over them that was covered with materials. I remember a lot of old stores used to have a slide or some sort of thing to throw stuff down or to pull stuff up from the basement of the store because they didn't have an elevator, right? So that must be what they're talking about. But it was covered with stuff, so they would have to move it. So ladder 116 removed the plywood and did not feel much heat on the walls with his bare hands, although the tick told him they were warm. The IC entered the hardware store, and 288 squad informed him that the fire was behind the cellar door on the Exposure 3 side of the building. Squad 288 was ordered to hold, which is why I highlighted this. They were told by command, okay, hang tough, don't open up, hold this position so that we can attack from the Exposure 3 or the Charlie side without having opposing hose lines in the building like we had at the Super Sofa fire for one example. So they're going to attack from one side. Of course, these guys would also be in the chimney if they had a rockin' fire. So they, were trying to avoid going down that stairway. During this time, they're holding the position. The door blew open a few times with a gust of blue flame. The incident commander and members of Squad 288 heard noises coming from the cellar that sounded like electrical arcing, and the sound was progressively getting louder, and stayed constant. Ladder 115 arrived at the scene a few minutes later, was assigned as Rapid Intervention Team or Fast Truck. At about 14:40, so 20 minutes into the initial call, captain from ladder 115 walked by Exposure 2 to check the progress at Exposure 3. So from the Charlie to the Delta side, no, Bravo to the Delta, Charlie. During this time, he noticed a chauffeur from ladder 163, which ended up being victim number 3 in this tragedy, and the chauffeur from Rescue 4, victim number 1, conducting venting operations on the cellar windows on the Bravo side of the structure. So they're opening up the cellar windows. Don't know that command ever told them to do that. It's not written in the official report. They were venting. The crew removed the steel bars from the window with extrication tool and vented the first cellar window, which was towards the rear of the structure. A firefighter from engine 262 looked in the window, did not see any fire. Then he assisted stretching the other hand line while the crew began venting the next cellar window closest to Exposure 1, so moving towards the front of the building. Firefighter from 288 and a firefighter from Rescue 4, then victim, which happened to be victim number 2, then forced the door in building 2 to gain access to the second floor office and storage area. They conducted a search of the second floor, so that's all good, making sure no one's in there. It had light smoke conditions. Firefighter from 288 then returned to the first floor to assist on the 2.5-inch line from the exposure 1 or alpha side. Deputy Chief 14 arrived on scene at 1442, proceeded to Exposure 1 to obtain a briefing from Battalion 49. Using hand tools and a power saw and extrication tools, the crew at the rear had just opened the reinforced steel security door 18 inches. Battalion 45, I think who's command at the back, Lieutenant from Ladder 163 entered the cellar through the narrow opening to assess the condition and entry and exit route. The smoke condition was light with no heat. Kind of weird that they opened the back door and the smoke is light, and it's heavy at the front and in the cellar when they looked in the door. No distinctive smells were present. It was a steel over wood door that's reinforced on the inside with an iron bar gate. The determination was made to remove the door to provide clear entry and exit route while operating. So they didn't want to send people in there when they only had 18 inches to deal with. So they're going to continue working on the door. Battalion 45 notified 49 that they would have good access in the rear once the door was removed. Battalion 49 at the inside checked the air supply of Squad 288 and decided on an attack down the cellar stairs. So he didn't want to wait, I guess. At this time, 49 did not hear any more arcing or sounds from the cellar. While the rear door was being removed, Incident Command stepped in the street to ensure that Engine 312 had stretched a 65 or 2.5-inch line to Exposure 1 as a backup for the line that 288 already had in there on the first floor of Exposure 1 Alpha side. Special Operations Command Chief had also arrived on scene and was being briefed by the IC in front of Exposure 1 entrance on the Alpha side. There was a radio transmission of an unknown lacquer odor, followed by acknowledgement of the same smell by someone else. So someone on the radio got on there and say, hey, smells like paint thinner or lacquer thinner here. And then an explosion took place within seconds of this transmission. So something fell over or something ruptured, spilled lacquer, changed the atmospheric content of flammables, and then the thing blew up. The incident commander and the special ops chief were blown into the street by the blast from the explosion. Battalion 45 and the forceful entry crew on the Exposure D side were blown from the doorway and into the backyard. The explosion collapsed the Exposure 2 wall, so the back wall, burying the chauffeur from Ladder 163, victim number 3, the event man from Ladder 116, the chauffeur from Rescue 4, which was victim number 1, who were conducting these venting operations. Squad 288 and an additional crew members on the first floor were lifted off their feet. They landed in the rubble created by the explosion, which led them to believe that they were blown into the cellar. They were able to exit through the debris of the Exposure 2 wall, the back wall, or side wall. Victim number 2 radioed that he was trapped in the cellar under the stairs. It's believed that victim number 2 was on the first floor landing at the top of the stairs to the cellar in Building 1 and was blown into the cellar down the stairs by the explosion. A PAR report was conducted, and it was concluded that 4 members were missing. The vent man from Ladder 116 was found buried under the brickwork. Store sign had fallen across his chest, shielding him from direct contact with the bricks. So even though the sign fell on him, it sort of shielded him, which was good. He was removed and transported to hospital by ambulance. Crew members began removing the bricks and rubble on Exposure 2 side by hand to search for victim 1 and victim 3. They were both found after about 25 minutes and transported. That'd be a long time looking for your buddies. 25 minutes. That would go on forever. Transported to the local hospital, they were pronounced dead. Firefighters cut a hole in the floor near the stairs of Building 1 to attempt rescue by placing victim number 2 by placing a ladder into the cellar. Crew members were forced off the ladder several times due to intense heat and fire. Firefighters took about an hour. They breached the wall of Exposure 4, so the delta wall of Building 2 from Building 3, going through the wall to try to get at him. Victim 2 was recovered by a member of a squad after he descended the portable ladder that was placed into that hole that they made earlier in the operation. Victim 2 was found near the base of the cellar stairs and was also pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death of victim 1 and 3 were massive blunt force trauma, and the cause of death for victim 2 was listed as asphyxia due to smoke inhalation. Any comments on up to there, guys?
Well, it just sounds like it was started out as maybe a routine kind of commercial fire, and then they had a lot of issues with getting access, which let the fire do what fire does, and then it really quickly went from we're trying, we're working to this went really bad, and then it was. I mean, I've never been in a fire like that. Hope I never am, but it was. I'm sure emotions are running high and stress was high, and like trying to get these guys out when the building just went kaboom is probably a tough thing to deal with.
Especially when the fire's still burning, you try to dig through rubble and get them out, and you still have to fight the fire. So that requires a lot of discipline. That is used to be problematic. I don't think New York is. I don't think they have a lack of discipline. On the contrary, I think they are very disciplined because of the assignments, so that engines still do the firefighting, and then the rescue guys take care of the rescue. Other departments will be probably struggling with that because everybody wants to save the brothers, right?
It's that chaotic change, though, right?
Yeah.
That all of a sudden, I mean, similar to the Southwest Inn fire, right, in Houston, that all of a sudden, the roof's collapsing and the guys, and we can't get at them and can't talk on the radio, and I can't see because of the smoke, and we're trying to put the fire out, and
We had a very similar fire in Edmonton, just that almost cost 3 guys their lives. There was a collapse, and it's same problem there, right? So
yeah. So recommendations and discussion, of course. Fire department should ensure that pre-incident plans are updated and used on mercantile occupancies, especially higher risk. Look at the supermarket fire in Phoenix. Look at the Super Sofa fire in Charleston. Look at the bowling alley fire that we did a month ago or two. Mercantile occupancies, right? NFPA 1620 talks about pre-incident planning, and a mercantile occupancy involves not only the responders but administrators, department supervisors, and other staff members. I know it's something I was trying to do in Fort Saskatchewan. We actually got a grant from Factory Mutual to buy a pre-incident planning program called APX. It's out of Ottawa, and it's supposed to make pre-incident planning very, very easy. I retired only a few months after we got it, so I'm not sure if they're using it or if they like it or not. But I mean, it is a big problem today. It was the same problem in that Shirley Towers in the UK. With the lack of information for those officers and commanders, that they didn't have the pre-incident plans. They were transferring them electronically, and they didn't have all the information they needed. So can be a problem. Is that it's a hardware store. What's in there?
I think New York is very good at pre-incident planning, better than a lot of other major fire departments. Where I'm not sure if it's every day tour or a couple a week or whatever, but the company has to go do BI, where they have to go do building inspections at a building in their first in district. And then they also have if you ever listen to New York, you'll hear the dispatcher say that SIDs are available for a building, and that's critical incident dispatch sheet or something. And
So are you saying? I remember a chief once trying to tell some other guys that they should do inspections, during a shift and stuff, so they're familiar with buildings and that kind of stuff. And I remember this firefighter was like really against that idea, saying, no, that's what inspectors are for, and we shouldn't have to do this. So are you saying that that's a good thing?
Well, I'm not sure that the companies in New York are checking fire extinguishers, but they're checking the building.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And knowing
maybe fire doors, because they might see a fire door open
Sure.
and say, hey, buddy.
Whatever, Paul. Sure, you're right. Great. We're not talking about that. My point is that New York is good at doing this and putting the information in their computers so dispatch can read out the building information while the companies are on their way to the fire. They're really good at having information on where they're going.
Which is good.
that doesn't change the fact that there was a fire and they went there. So even if you knew that there was flammable liquids in the basement, would they have changed their approach?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we're gonna some of
That's
the
the
other
question.
recommendations talk about that. Is Talks, of course, recommendation 2 about coordinating ventilation with attack. So here they maybe potentially you could say that they vented a little early because they didn't have attack. They couldn't get in there yet. They were still fighting with security gates and they had lines and everything in place, but they weren't ready to attack, and they'd already vented in those basement windows, and so that may have been a factor.
The other problem with pre-planning a building is that's what it looks like right now. That's where the stuff is stored right now. That's what the contents are right now. It doesn't mean that's what it is tomorrow or in 5 years or in 15 years when the fire happens and you're not even going to the same occupancy as your pre-plan said you're going to.
Yeah, it talks about it here in the NIOSH report, of course. Ventilation timing, extremely important. Must be carefully coordinated between both fire attack and ventilation crews. Ventilation should occur just prior to interior crews advancing hose lines. Proper venting of heat, smoke, and combustible air gas mixtures from buildings can, of course, reduce the possibility of dangerous situations.
I think, well, Paul, I think what they've done, if I follow that correctly, they were opening up windows and checked, and there was always light smoke. So I don't think that any of those openings affected that fire. That explosion would have happened no matter what.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's a good point. Is the chief or the sector command even went in the basement a little bit and said, light smoke, and it's probably one side of the cellar to the other, right? Is probably what happened. Even though there was a fire door there, there's only a limited flow and limited air ingress to make it go. They talk about here recommendation number 3: firefighters trained to know the hazards associated with cellar fires, and this is the problem. And I think you talked on it, Doug, already. Is that the problem is here is a cellar is essentially almost a confined space, right? It's according to Chief Vincent Dunn, confinement increases the chances of a combustible gas explosion because the cellar is such a confined space within the building, fewer windows and doors leading to fresh air. The chance of an explosive mixture developing where gas escapes is increased. Also, many combustible liquids and gases present can form an explosive mixture. I mean, we had that the C-can in BC. That's another one we should do. There was a C-can beside a lumber mill fire in interior BC, and they were on top of the C-can even to fight the fire in the mill. And then after the fire, a captain was walking in front of the door of the C-can. The C-can blew up. There was a very, very small quantity, like not even a liter of combustible liquids inside the C-can, but eventually they heated up and the atmosphere within the C-can got to a point where the mixture was just right 20 minutes or so after the fire, and boom, and it blew the doors off the C-can and killed the captain walking in front. BC Fire Commissioner's Office even put out notices and everything on that. We should definitely add that one to our podcast list, but it's a confined space and didn't here we had tons of fuel, but it doesn't take tons of fuel to make a big explosion. We all know that. Look at a propane cylinder, for example. Vincent Dunn also talks about, reduce your chances for injury when cellar explosion is anticipated by these precautions. Stand clear of any windows that may suddenly explode outward. Avoid standing near the entrance opening that will vent or pressure or shock wave of an explosion. Do not use a cinder block or masonry wall for protection against the force of the explosion because they're not strong laterally. Of course, they're strong up and down. Most important, wear all your PPE, which these guys all did, which was great. There may be a flash fire after the explosion, which could be created by the rapid ignition of the combustible gas. Number 4 recommendation: municipalities and building owners consider requiring or modifying older structures to meet new building codes and standards. That's always a tough one, getting people to update codes. The sprinklers, of course, would have maybe helped with this kind of thing, but even the fire door being closed or how much they had in the building would be something. NFPA talks about the erosion of the safety ecosystem. So how and this happened in the Super Sofa building fire, where the fire doors didn't work because stuff was blocking them open, and they modified the building without permits, and they had that breezeway between the two buildings which contained the fire, and they had all kinds of, again, the same thing, lacquer and high volatile chemicals in a workshop, if you will, which might have even been a type 3 or something occupancy, right? Hazardous, it's a hazardous place. And the same as the ghost ship fire in Oakland. This erosion of the safety system leads to the death of firefighters. They also talked in their recommendations about building construction information on exterior placards, which we haven't seen. There's a few jurisdictions doing that with lightweight trusses. That wasn't really a factor here. The construction of the building, in my mind, wasn't a factor. You guys?
No, I don't think it was a factor. I think it was just that some chemicals found a heat source and went kaboom.
Yeah, they talk about in recommendations about how much you can have inside the building. Local codes adopted or to enforce how much flammables can be in a building below grade. The city had developed rules prohibiting storage or use of propane or liquefied gases below grade. At minimum, there was 102 14-ounce cylinders stored in the cellar under building 1 and 2. The fire door, which was supposed to divide it up, was blocked open, which of course is against fire code. So they weren't following what was required. They should also ensure safeguards that fire doors are maintained and operational. It may have provided additional time protection for the cylinders of propane and oxygen that were being stored.
Some of these recommendations are a little annoying to me because, I mean, they're not going to go check that every single fire door in their first district is not blocked open. They're not going to go check every basement and cellar and garage to make sure they only have 20 cans because the code says you can only have 20 cans. Like, it's hard. It just seems a little bit like armchair quarterbacking, where it's like, we should have done this, and it's a completely unrealistic thing to ask a fire department to do.
I think it's very generic. It's very generic.
But hang on, guys. This is CRR, Community Risk Management, Risk Reduction. So the inspectors for this municipality, that's their job once a year or so. This would be a once a year, typically a once a year inspection. The fire doors and this stuff can't be stored down here. Those are violations that the building owner is not meeting fire code.
Sure, and you were a fire chief of a small, or a deputy fire chief in some small fire departments and small municipalities. And how much time did you have to go check every single fire door in your jurisdiction?
Couldn't do the inspections.
Now multiply that by a lot to get the size of New York City.
But how do we change the focus from response to prevention?
Well, you got to beef up your prevention.
Right.
And you got to make people liable and force them to change it. Like if you want to renovate an old house, my wife always watches these renovation shows, and then the inspector comes in. It's like, no, you have to rip everything out. It's like, that's insanity. But as a private person, you are forced to renovate your whole property. I think there's a discrepancy towards the business side, right? So they might not be having to adhere to the same standards, or they go absolute minimum standard, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I imagine New York. The city. Most of the cities out here, the big cities, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, they have a very robust inspection program that is in Red Deer. I know Red Deer, they do their inspections. It's the city nearest to me where I did business. They were there like a clock every year to do their inspection. And the first inspection, the annual inspection, is free. If there's any violations, then you had to pay for a follow-up and sort of a bit of a penalty there too. And I know Calgary's actually done some successful enforcement with inspections, but it's a slow road, and how do you get enough resources to do it? But it's what saves firefighters' lives and citizens' lives as well, is those inspections.
It all comes down to the dollar, right? What's a city going to choose to spend its money on? Especially when it comes to the fire department, if their options are like, well, this engine company or these 4 inspectors,
right?
I'm sure they're going to keep the engine company open.
Well, we're fighting to get 5 or 6 guys on an engine.
It would be it's easy if it was if it was as easy as just saying, well, make prevention better. Well, I'm sure they would, but there's a lot of factors tied into that, and that's where I feel like these reports of the recommendations aren't that realistic. Where they just say, "Well, do this." Well, if they could do that, they would do that. If New York or name whatever city you want could say, "Well, we're going to check every fire door every year and make sure it's not blocked, and we're going to check every whatever and make sure that they're following code," it's just not going to happen.
So it takes, like Charleston, 9 firefighters to die for the
Yeah.
city to cough up and staff the trucks appropriately.
The question would be, in this scenario, it was a closed, as you said, confined space with all the doors closed. What is the safe amount of flammable liquid or gas that can be stored there?
It's really small. I'd have to look it up to be sure.
But if it's an enclosed room, you don't need much to create that shockwave that pushes over a 70-year-old brick wall. So,
Yep.
right, it doesn't take much. And then you look at we talk about the electric vehicles and those things. Like, they produce so much heat and smoke. Like, that thing could explode into your face just through the
Batteries.
combustion process, right?
Yep.
So.
Yep. Well, electric.
As Doug said, it's
batteries.
very generic sometimes. I would say it's upsetting. It's just we learn from it, right?
That's right.
It's just
That's
like
right.
we talked about. I can't remember if it was before we started recording or not, but like you bring up Lacombe County shop, Paul.
Yep.
Let's make it 100 square feet less so we don't have to put a sprinkler in. So
Right.
where's their priority? Their priority is not on the people's safety or the firefighters' safety. Their priority is on, let's just change this so we don't have to follow that.
Yep.
Well,
All the time.
it's this.
Yep.
So if there was a fire there, the recommendations would say ensure that commercial buildings have sprinkler systems. Well, we tried, and they found a loophole around the law. It's going to happen the same way every other time too.
And most people say it's okay if there's a fire, I just let it burn. But when you say, well, when your tractor in the shop is on fire and you want to save your multi-million-dollar building because of a fire in a $100,000 tractor, you're going to let it go? Well, no. Well, then, yeah. Anyway, good discussion, guys. Great chatting. Thank you for listening to another Emergency Traffic Podcast. We appreciate your interest and hope that you find these interesting and informative. Give us a like or a thumbs up. You can follow us on Twitter at Podcast Traffic, our Facebook page, or the Emergency Traffic Podcast, and on Instagram. You can mail us with your feedback and thoughts at emergencytrafficpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Stay safe.